A white woman calls the police on a black teenager, falsely accusing her of being a threat. Confident that her word alone will be enough, she watches as officers arrive, ready to take her side. But everything changes when the teen's mother, a powerful civil rights attorney, shows up. With undeniable evidence in hand, she flips the power dynamic, exposing the lie. As the police shift their focus to the woman who made the false report, she freezes in shock, realizing she's the one in trouble now. The teenager walks away victorious, learning a powerful lesson. True power isn't about who speaks the loudest, it's about knowing when you've already won. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting golden hues across the quiet suburban park. Maya Carter, a 16-year-old black teenager, sat on a bench, scrolling through her phone, enjoying the crisp autumn air. She had stopped for a moment on her way home from school, taking in the peacefulness of the park. But her quiet moment was shattered by the sharp voice of a woman approaching her. Deborah Whitman, better known as Karen to those who had experienced her entitled wrath, marched toward Maya, her face twisted with suspicion. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, arms folded tightly across her chest. "You don't belong in this neighborhood." Maya blinked, startled by the hostility in the woman's voice. "I'm just sitting here. I live a few blocks away," she said, keeping her voice calm. But Karen wasn't listening. She had already made up her mind. "Nice try," she scoffed. "I know exactly what's happening here. First, it's sitting on a bench. Next thing, you're casing houses. I'm not stupid." Maya's stomach tightened. She had heard stories like this before. Innocent people accused, assumptions made, police called. And now, it was happening to her. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she insisted, her voice a mix of disbelief and frustration. Karen ignored, her already reaching for her phone. She dialed 911, her voice shifting into mock distress. "Yes, I'm at Westwood Park," she said loudly, ensuring Maya could hear every word. "There's a suspicious girl here. She's refusing to leave, and I feel threatened." Maya's breath caught. Threatened? Her pulse quickened as she looked around, hoping someone would intervene. But the few people in the park looked away, unwilling to get involved. She held up her hands in exasperation. "You're lying. I haven't done anything." But Karen smirked, too sure of her power. The system had always been on her side. She had no doubt the police would believe her over a teenage black girl sitting alone in the park. And then, in the distance, the sound of sirens pierced the air. Maya's heart pounded, fear creeping in. But what Karen didn't know was that she wasn't the only one who had made a phone call. Because at that very moment, another car was pulling up. And when the door opened, the person stepping out would change everything. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, have you ever witnessed someone misuse their authority like this? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because what happens next will leave everyone speechless. Maya Carter had always been taught to stay calm in situations like these. Her mother had warned her about the assumptions people would make about her because of the color of her skin. She had been told to avoid confrontation, to choose her battles wisely. And for most of her life, she had listened. But today, that wasn't an option. The crisp autumn breeze rustled through the trees of Westwood Park, a quiet suburban escape surrounded by pristine sidewalks and stately homes. It was the kind of place where people walked their dogs, sipped lattes, and trusted that nothing bad ever happened here. Maya had been walking home from school when she decided to stop for a moment, resting on a bench beneath the shade of a towering oak tree. She had done nothing wrong, but Deborah Whitman thought otherwise. Karen, as Maya would later think of her, was the kind of woman who saw herself as the unofficial law of the neighborhood. In her crisp black blazer and pearl earrings, she exuded the type of privilege that made her believe her discomfort was enough to call for backup. And right now, she was uncomfortable. She had spotted Maya the moment she entered the park, watching her from a distance with narrowed eyes. She didn't know who the girl was, but in her mind, she didn't belong. That was enough. With quick, determined strides, she marched toward Maya, her heels clicking against the pavement. "What are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. Maya, startled by the sudden hostility, looked up from her phone. "Excuse me? I asked you what you're doing here," Karen repeated, arms crossing over her chest. "Are you lost?" Maya let out a slow breath, already feeling the tension creeping in. "No," she replied carefully. "I'm just sitting. I live a few blocks away." Karen's expression twisted with disbelief. That answer didn't fit her narrative. "Oh, really?" she scoffed. "Because I've never seen you here before, and I know everyone in this neighborhood." Maya straightened in her seat, the weight of the moment sinking in. She knew what this was. She had seen enough stories like hers end badly, but still, she tried to reason with the woman. "I just got out of school," she said, keeping her voice even. "I was walking home and stopped to rest for a minute. That's all." But Karen didn't want to listen. She had already decided Maya was guilty of something. "Nice try," she said, shaking her head. "I know exactly what's happening here. I've seen kids like you before. You're loitering, probably waiting for your friends so you can start trouble." Maya's chest tightened. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she said, voice firmer now. But Karen wasn't interested in explanations. She wanted control. She pulled out her phone, her fingers moving swiftly as she dialed. "You Juanan, what's your emergency?" "Yes, I'm at Westwood Park," Karen said, her tone suddenly shifting into one of feigned distress. "There's a suspicious girl here. She's refusing to leave, and I feel threatened." Maya's stomach dropped. Threatened? Her hands clenched into fists as she stood, trying one last time to reason with the woman. "You're lying. I didn't do anything to you." Karen didn't even look at her. She kept talking, adding more false details as though rehearsing a script. She was too sure of her power, too confident that her word would be believed over Maya's. And then, in the distance, sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Maya's heart pounded. She had done nothing wrong, but that had never mattered before. What Karen didn't know, what she couldn't have predicted, was that Maya had already sent a text. And the person who had just pulled up behind the flashing lights was not someone she wanted to face. Because Maya's mother, Danielle Carter, wasn't just any mother. She was a civil rights attorney, and she had arrived to settle this once and for all. Karen's voice cut through the quiet hum of the park like a blade. "I asked you a question. Why are you here?" she snapped, her tone dripping with entitlement. Maya took a steady breath, her pulse racing, but she refused to shrink under Karen's glare. "I already told you," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "I live nearby. I was just walking home from school." Karen let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head as if she had just caught Maya in a lie. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "I don't buy it. I've never seen you around here before, and kids like you don't just wander into this neighborhood unless they're up to something." Maya felt her fists tighten at her sides. She had heard things like this before, backhanded accusations, subtle assumptions, but never this direct. Still, she forced herself to remain composed. "I'm not up to anything," she said, her voice firm now. "I'm just sitting in the park. That's not a crime." Karen's face darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. The fact that Maya wasn't cowering, wasn't apologizing or running away, infuriated her. She wanted control. She wanted fear. And when she didn't get it, she escalated. Her hand flew to her phone, and in one smooth motion she unlocked it and pressed it to her ear. "That's it. I'm calling the police." Maya's stomach twisted. "What?" "You don't have to do that." Karen ignored her. The moment the dispatcher answered, her voice changed, shifting into a tone of exaggerated distress. "Yes, hello? I need officers at Westwood Park immediately. There's a girl here. She's harassing me. She won't leave, and I don't feel safe." Maya's mouth fell open in disbelief. "That's not true," she said, stepping forward. Instinctively, Karen took a dramatic step back as though Maya had lunged at her. "Oh my God," she gasped into the phone. "She's getting aggressive. Please, hurry." Maya's heart pounded. She looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would step in. But the few people in the park either turned away or simply watched. In silence, unwilling to get involved. She was alone. Karen ended the call with a satisfied smirk, crossing her arms as she stared Maya down. "Now we'll see who they believe," she said smugly. Maya's hands clenched at her sides, her breath unsteady. She had done nothing wrong, but that had never mattered before. And then, in the distance, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Maya stood frozen as the flashing red and blue lights came into view, growing brighter as a line of police. Cars rolled to a stop at the edge of the park. She felt sick. She had seen too many stories like this. Stories that didn't end well for people who looked like her. The moment the first officer stepped out, Karen's entire demeanor shifted again. She let out a breathy sigh, clutching her chest as if she had narrowly escaped some horrible fate. "Oh, thank God you're here," she said, stepping toward the officers. "I was so scared." Maya opened her mouth to speak, but the officers barely looked at her. They went straight to Karen, their faces serious, listening intently as she spun her fabricated story. She was sitting here, staring at people, acting suspicious, Karen said, her voice smooth and rehearsed. "When I asked her to leave, she got aggressive. She's been yelling at me, refusing to go. I was terrified." Maya shook her head, stepping forward. "That's not what happened," she said, her voice strong but controlled. One of the officers lifted a hand. "Miss, hold on a moment," he said, as if Maya were the disruption here. He turned back to Karen, nodding sympathetically. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Karen let out a dramatic sigh. "Just shaken," she said, touching her chest. "I don't know what she's capable of." Maya's stomach clenched. They believed her, just like that. One of the officers turned to her now, his expression unreadable. "We're going to need you to come with us," he said, taking a step forward. Panic flared in Maya's chest. "What? I didn't do anything." The officer took another step. "We just need to ask you some questions." Maya took a step back, her heart pounding. This was really happening. But before the officer could move any closer, the screech of tires cut through the chaos. A sleek black SUV skidded to a stop just feet away from them, and the driver's side door flew open. Maya exhaled sharply, relief washing over her. "Because," Stepping out of that car was the one person who would not let this happen. Her mother, Danielle Carter. And the moment Karen saw her, her smug confidence vanished. The moment the SUV door swung open, the air in the park shifted. The officers, who had been fully focused on Maya, turned toward the new arrival, sensing that the situation had just changed. Karen's smug confidence flickered, but she held her ground, believing she was still in control. Danielle Carter stepped out, radiating calm authority. She wasn't flustered, wasn't angry. She was in control. Her sharp eyes scanned the scene. In an instant, her daughter standing tense, the officers surrounding her, and Karen's self-satisfied smirk. She had seen this story unfold 1,000 times before. But today it ended differently. She strode forward with purpose, her heels clicking against the pavement, her presence commanding attention without a single word. Every officer straightened, slightly, instinctively aware that they were no longer in charge of this moment. Karen smirked, mistaking Danielle's composed demeanor for something she could manipulate. Big mistake. "Oh, good," Karen said, crossing her arms. "You must. Be the mother." Danielle didn't respond immediately. She reached her daughter first, gently placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. Maya exhaled shakily but felt the tension ease from her body. Her mother was here, and that meant everything was about to change. Danielle finally turned to Karen, her expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" Karen lifted her chin, confident. "Your daughter was causing a disturbance," she said smoothly, gesturing vaguely toward the park. "She refused to leave when I asked her to. I had no choice but to call the police." Danielle arched a brow as if she were observing something beneath her level of interest. "A disturbance?" she echoed. "By sitting on a bench, Karen?" Scoffed. "She was loitering, looking suspicious, and when I asked her to leave, she got aggressive with me." Maya let out a sharp breath. "That's a lie," she blurted, frustration spilling over. "I didn't." Danielle raised a single hand, signaling for Maya to stop, not because she didn't believe her, but because this battle had already been won. With slow, deliberate movements, Danielle reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. With a flick of her thumb, she turned the screen toward the officers. Karen froze. The officers leaned in slightly, their eyes narrowing as they watched the video playing on the screen. It was everything. The moment Karen had approached Maya, the way she had interrogated her, cut her off when she tried to explain, the way she had lied to the dispatcher, fabricating details about Maya being aggressive. Every smug expression, every condescending remark, all caught in crystal-clear footage. The silence that followed was absolute. Karen's face drained of color. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if her brain were scrambling for a way to backtrack, to undo what had just happened. Danielle's voice was ice. "You just called the police on a child for sitting in a park." One of the officers shifted uncomfortably. Another cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. They had walked into the situation thinking it was clear-cut, but now they had been played, and they knew it. Karen stammered, her composure cracking. I didn't. It looked like—" Danielle tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing. "What exactly did it look like?" she asked, her tone so sharp that even the officers felt the sting. Karen swallowed hard. I just thought she was— I didn't know." Danielle slipped her phone back into her purse. "You didn't know," she repeated, "yet you assumed. You profiled. You lied to law enforcement." Karens. Hands trembled at her sides. The officers had stopped looking at Maya entirely. Now, all eyes were on Karen, and for the first time since this entire encounter began, she was the one being questioned. The silence was suffocating. The officers who had arrived ready to treat Maya as the threat now stood frozen, their attention locked onto Danielle Carter. One of them, an older officer with a neatly pressed uniform, pulled out his tablet, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. When his eyes landed on the result, his entire demeanor changed. His back straightened, and his throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He glanced at the officer beside him, a silent exchange passing between them. Then, carefully, he turned back to Danielle, ma'am. His voice was suddenly far more measured, far more cautious. Your attorney, Danielle Carter? Karen's head snapped toward Danielle, her brows furrowing in confusion. Attorney, she muttered, the confidence in her voice beginning to waver. Danielle didn't blink. She simply let the weight of the title settle over them. The officer shifted uncomfortably. You're the civil rights attorney who handled the Harrington case? Danielle finally nodded. Among others. Her voice was smooth, unreadable. I've spent years exposing racial bias in law enforcement, fighting wrongful arrests, and ensuring that officers who abuse their power are held accountable. She let the words hang in the air, watching as the officers took a collective step back. Karen's lips parted, but no words came out. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She had expected to be comforted, reassured, believed, like always. But now, standing in front of this woman, this attorney with a reputation for taking down people like her, the reality of the situation finally crashed down on her. Danielle took a small step forward, her voice steady and controlled. Let's be clear about what happened here, she said, addressing the officers. A grown woman saw a black teenager sitting on a bench and decided that was enough to call the police. She fabricated a story about feeling threatened. And without a second thought, you arrived and treated my daughter as the problem, not her. One of the younger officers cleared his throat, shifting awkwardly. Karen opened her mouth to interject, but Danielle wasn't finished. My daughter is 16, she continued, her sharp eyes locking onto Karen. She's an honors student. She was on her way home from school when she was stopped, interrogated, and falsely accused simply because this woman, she gestured toward Karen with deliberate precision, didn't like the way she looked. Karen felt the blood drain from her face. The older officer nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. He turned toward Karen, his stance no longer protective but critical. Ma'am, he said carefully, his voice no longer sympathetic, you claimed this young girl was harassing you, that she was aggressive. He glanced at Danielle's phone. And yet, the video tells a different story. Karen gasped, realizing what was happening. The power had shifted. One of the officers took a step toward Danielle. Would you like to file a complaint against this woman, ma'am? He asked, his voice far gentler than before. Karen's breath hitched. Wait, what? She turned toward them, panic flashing. R across her face. No, you don't understand. I thought. She was stammering now, her carefully crafted lies falling apart in real time. The officer barely looked at her. No one was listening anymore. And, for the first time, Karen realized she was the one in trouble. The shift in power was undeniable. The officers, who had arrived ready to act against Maya, now focused entirely on Karen. The smug confidence she had worn so easily was gone, replaced with wide-eyed panic as the weight of her actions finally caught up to her. One of the officers took a step toward her, his tone now far less accommodating. "Ma'am, do you realize that filing a false police report is a criminal offense?" Karen shook her head rapidly, her hands trembling at her sides. No, you don't understand. I wasn't trying to lie. I thought she was up to something. She wouldn't tell me why she was here." Danielle let out a breath, a small, knowing shake of her head. "She did tell you. You just didn't listen." The officer exhaled sharply, unimpressed by Karen's excuses. "Ma'am, you made a direct criminal accusation against a minor with no evidence. That's obstruction of justice at best, and racial profiling at worst." Karen's mouth opened and closed, her panic mounting. "I didn't mean to." Danielle cut her off with a cold, piercing stare. "Yes, you did." Karen turned desperately toward Maya, as if appealing to the very person she had just tried to criminalize. "Listen, sweetie," she stammered, her voice shaking. I was just looking out for the neighborhood. It wasn't personal, I swear." Maya stiffened at the word sweetie, disgusted by the sudden change in Karen's demeanor. She had gone from aggressor to desperate in mere seconds. Danielle stepped forward, placing a protective hand on Maya's shoulder. "You don't get to walk away from this," she said, her voice cool and unwavering. "Not this time." Karen flinched, realizing there was no way out. The officers continued questioning her, their interest in Maya completely forgotten. Karen had gone from victim to suspect. And Maya? She stood still, watching as her mother handled everything with absolute control. She didn't yell. She didn't demand justice at the top of her lungs. She didn't have to. She had let the truth speak for itself. Danielle turned to Maya, nodding toward the car. "Come on," she said simply. "We're done here." Without another glance at Karen, Maya followed her mother toward the waiting SUV, feeling something she hadn't expected: relief. Once inside, she sat in silence for a moment, still processing everything. Finally, she turned to her mother, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "How did you stay so calm?" Danielle, adjusting the rearview mirror, let out a small chuckle. "Because people like her expect us to lose control," she said, glancing over at her daughter with a knowing smile. "They expect anger, tears, outbursts. That's what gives them power." Maya nodded slowly, thinking back to how Karen had fed off the idea that Maya would act out, how she had assumed she could twist the situation to her advantage. Her mother's voice was steady as she continued. "Power isn't about yelling. It's about knowing when you've already won." Maya leaned back in her seat, the truth of those words settling deep inside her. She had won. As Danielle and Maya walked away, the weight of what had just happened hung in the air. Behind them, Karen stood frozen, her once smug expression replaced with a look of sheer disbelief. The police officers who had initially rushed to her defense now focused entirely on her, their notepads out, their questions sharp. She was no longer the victim. She was the one being investigated. Her privileged confidence had evaporated. She had expected instant validation, assumed that the world would continue to bend in her favor. But now, as she stood alone in that park, her carefully constructed reality was crumbling. Danielle didn't look back. Maya didn't either. There was no need. They had won. As the SUV pulled away, Maya stared out of the window, watching the park fade into the distance. She had walked into that place thinking she was powerless. But now she knew better. Racism still thrives in places that should be safe. It hides behind privilege, behind false accusations, behind the assumption that one person's word matters more than another's. But when we challenge it, when we refuse to stay silent, we change the narrative. If this were your child, what would you have done? Have you ever experienced racial profiling or been falsely accused? Share your story in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you believe in standing up for justice, in exposing injustice where it hides, subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Together, we can fight for change.